Katie LaFalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and this is our Saturday book, and we're doing The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan, and this really is video number 14. Right now, I just realized that I misnumbered my extra video the other day. I'm wearing a black shawl, and it says video 14, it's really video 13, and I apologize. A little harried with company. So this is video 14, and we are deep into the odd goings on around Marilyn Monroe. Let's just continue. When we last left off, we were talking about Dorothy Kilgallen, who had questioned what was going on with Marilyn. So she had maybe sown some new seeds of doubt about these relationships in Marilyn's life. And I'm going to be really circumspect about the names I name out loud, so I think you'll be able to figure out who I'm talking about. So starting at this next part of the book, we're talking about Buddy Greco, who spent time with her at the resort, Cal Neva Resort, that second to the last weekend. Sinatra was there, but Sam Giancana was there, and they had a little head-to-head with Marilyn. So let's move forward. Greco says that he saw her and she seemed like she'd been drinking, and he talked to her later that evening, and she was distressed, but she was fine. She was sober. So, you know, maybe she would have been partying a little bit. He said, I didn't think when I talked to her that there was anything wrong, that she wasn't going to be long for this world. That really took him by surprise. But he did say she was distressed. And why was she distressed? Well, because she'd been brought there under false pretenses by the Lawfords. They had promised the presence of the AG, and he wasn't there. Joe DiMaggio was there, and she was shocked by that because she was trying to avoid him. So she spent all of her time trying to avoid him. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be staying elsewhere, but he kept hovering. And there was this plot that had been presented to her of blackmailing the two brothers. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you're going to have to go back. I don't want to name names. For obvious reasons, I don't want to name names. This is sensitive. I suppose we could say allegedly in front of everything, although there is so much documentation from the Freedom of Information Act that proves much of this is true. That, you know, photographs and FBI files, that kind of thing. She was under surveillance by Hoffa, the FBI, a guy called Otash, and the Mafia. Yeah, the Mafia was separate from Hoffa in this regard. So anyway, she had a number of reasons to be upset. She was distracted. The rumor is that she threatened to tell on the brothers and their indiscretions, but that's not true because she was a very discreet person. She had many, many opportunities to blow the whistle on them, and she didn't. Excuse me, she went out of her way. The big question that we just don't know is, did the mob have compromising photos of her to try to force her? Did they have blackmail on her? They certainly had audio tapes, but that's not the same thing. The rumor had, there was another rumor that she had been drugged and assaulted and photoed that night, but it's not true. And it's not true because other people saw her elsewhere and she was fine elsewhere on the facility. And she was fine. And there's no proof of any of this. It's just these rumors that are thrown out. And also, Sinatra was there, and he was her friend as best he knew how to be a friend. He was protective of her, and he was disgusted with Giancana, and he was disgusted with the brothers' treatment of her. Joe DiMaggio, was close friends with Giancana's mother and with extended members of that group. And it's really pretty unlikely that they would hurt her because of him. I mean, I suppose, but the general feeling is outside the rumor mill is that wouldn't have happened. And the reports are that, and this is a quote, Giancana always treated her like a lady. He was always nice to her. Of course, how much does that mean? We don't know. So the authors told this next version that Marilyn was hanging out with Pat Lawford and that she developed symptoms of food poisoning. And it might have been her prescription pain drugs that she was taking for her endometriosis and a combination of symptoms of endometriosis. But whatever, she was nauseated and she was sick. And Pat got scared that this is Pat Lawford. Pat got scared. Did somebody try to poison her? Marilyn was weak and she had thrown up so much she got dehydrated and she fainted. Peter Lawford, Frank Sinatra, and then Giancana rushed in to help, and in the confusion, Pat Lawford was trying to hold her up, and in the confusion of them running in to help, Pat and Marilyn got knocked over. So at one point, yes, they were on the floor, but not because Marilyn was, in her cups or whatever. So then the story is that Sinatra got his plane and off they went out of there to Los Angeles. But the photographer, William Woodfield, got a roll of film to develop from Sinatra, gave him a roll of film, and it showed Marilyn on the floor with Giancana over her, and this was caught in the act of helping her up, but it could have looked weird out of context, and it could have been used in an embarrassing way out of context. Sinatra wanted to keep these pictures to ensure that Marilyn would remain silent. On Monday, so he's no golden boy to her. On Sunday, she called the AG. On Monday, she called the AG, and she told Paula Strasberg that she was afraid of these mobsters, that now she was scared. Peter Lawford was hungover on Monday, and he was sent, despite that, by the older brother to sort out the mess that was developing on this movie about his PT-109 boat. This was another side fiasco that was going on. So this is just where these people were and what they were up to 2 weeks before she died. Chapter 39, Marilyn's final days. So backing up a little bit, on July 25th of 62, Spiros, whose last name I can never remember, and Zanuck pooled their resources. Spiros had 98,000 shares, and Zanuck had 110,000 shares, and they decided to take their shares together and take control of Fox. So they combined them, and they made Zanuck the head of the board, and they made Skouras is his name. They made him the chairman of the board. Then the two cronies of the family from Boston, Loeb and Gold, they resigned. They were Wall Street guys. They had no experience in films. They knew nothing about the movie making industry. They were plants on the board to get old Joe, his way. Zanuck said these guys are not qualified any more than I'm qualified to plead a case in court or to sell stocks. That was their area of expertise. He increased the board to 15 members, and thereby being able to establish who they were, he took creative control again. Dorothy Kilgallen wrote, Now it can be told, Howard Hughes offered to back up Darryl Zanuck in his battle for control of 20th Century Fox by acquiring hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of the movie company's stock. If the tussle had reached the chips are down stage, Zanuck would have accepted his pal's aid, but it turned out not to be necessary. So they paid off this whole thing just by making fabulous movies after this. Marilyn was happy when she found out about this because she knew she'd be back to work. And because it was the people who knew nothing who had gotten rid of her, to blame her for all their mistakes. She went to Dean Martin's to discuss the film resuming, and they were celebrating, the two of them. They're back at work, you know. Dean's son, Ricky, who was 9 years old at the time, remembered much about this for a 2016 interview for a book, I Met Marilyn. And he was sort of an eyewitness, a fly on the wall. You know how kids are. He was able to confirm a lot of this stuff. He overheard it. Fox executives loathed Marilyn Monroe. She had no idea that they loathed her. They wanted to make the movie the way they wanted, and they thought that she was over the hill. They didn't like her getting embroiled in the creative process. She was a woman, and she had a lot of creative control, and they didn't like it. They had a new boss, Levathis, and he had no idea about how to make a movie. He was a money guy. He was actually an advertising guy. And Marilyn may not have realized all about this for a really long time. Dean Martin immediately disliked these guys. The more I read about Dean Martin, I'll tell you. He disliked Weinstein. He pretended to like Weinstein pretended to like Marilyn, but he treated her badly to manipulate her into doing what he wanted and what they wanted. And Dean Martin saw this, and he really hated it. He heard the executives talking about it, and when she got fired, he quit. He said, yeah, I don't like how you're treating her, and I quit too. Especially fascinating was his son Ricky's recollections of how, on her visits to the Martin home, Marilyn was not depressed. Quote, she got on well, very well with Dad, and he had time for her. This is Dean Martin. He had time for her, and it showed. I never saw for a moment that she was depressed at all, but I know she had a lot of hangers-on, like that press woman, Pat Newcomb, who was something of a dragon, basically, and also the housekeeper, Eunice Murray. I knew she wanted to get rid of them because I would sit and listen to her telling Dad about how they spied on her. She actually used those words. They spied on her. It's thought now that maybe she had a little bit of an eating disorder because she was fully aware that the new look in the 60s was developing into this, emaciated look. And she would have to go do her own shopping. She would say that her housekeeper forgot to get groceries. And, why didn't she get rid of this woman? I'll never understand. And Ricky, Dean Martin's son, did not like Dr. Greenson. He says he was creepy and very unsure about everything, yet he kept a tight control over Marilyn and made sure that she deferred to him in all sorts of silly dilemmas in her life, something, again, that was really annoying to Dad, to Dean Martin. Young Martin recalled, one night Greenson came to the house for Marilyn like he was her boyfriend or something, which I found rather strange. He refused drinks and kind of hung around the hallway waiting for her, which got me thinking that she must have hated him just turning up, as she was having a good time with us, and he came to ruin it. Greenson acted mentally unstable, according to witnesses like Ricky, and unprofessional and inappropriately jealous. Ralph Roberts put it even more bluntly. He said her attitude changed. She deeply resented him. The doctors saw him severing all of her close relationships, and he was taking control of her life, and she was starting to assert herself. She was radically turning on Dr. Greenson and Mrs. Murray, the woman he'd put with her. He had given Eunice Murray the job, and she felt that that Murray was there to spy on her. She was starting to take control of things in her life, and she was not spiraling down as the false story evolved later. She had become more optimistic. She had made a new friend, a really close friendship with Wally Cox. If anybody remembers Wally Cox, Mr. Peepers, I remember that show. He was hilarious, and he was actually not what he pretended to be acting. He wasn't like a milquetoast, quiet, meek little weakling. I guess he was really buff, and he was really into bodybuilding and weightlifting and stuff, but you'd never know it from the kind of parts he played. But she and he got on intellectually. They really enjoyed each other's company. He was married, but they really enjoyed each other's friendship. Marlon Brando was best friends with Wally Cox until Wally Cox died in 1973. Brando disrespect. This is kind of weird. He disrespected Cox's widow, and rather than giving her the ashes or putting the ashes where it had been requested by her, he hung on to them and carried them with him. Oh, that was a little weird. So Marilyn and Cox grew to be really close friends. So on Thursday, July 26th of 1962, the AG flew into Los Angeles, and suddenly Marilyn had a last-minute hair appointment. Pat Newcomb later said, now Pat Newcomb, just to refresh everybody's memory for this new video, was her publicity person or publicist. Pat Newcomb later said that Pat, dined with the AG a few days before Marilyn died. It would have had to have been on this visit to LA. Was Marilyn there too? There's no mention of it. Newcomb had a crush on him. Was she dining alone with him? What was going on there? Saturday the 28th, the AG called Pat frantic. Why? What was going on? We don't know. July 26th, a New York Times article upset the family from Boston, outside Boston, and they put pressure on Hoover, and the FBI tapped the writer of the article, H. Baldwin, and his sources, and he was interrogated at home by the FBI, and this is absolutely an assault on the free press, and it's dangerous, and it was because they didn't like what he said in the New York Times. Media icon James Reston called Baldwin to commiserate about this incident and to urge him to put pressure on the AG to stop Hoover, not knowing that the AG's family was pressuring Hoover to do it. This family also tried to kill 2 news specials about the CIA and its domestic surveillance program, which was totally against the National Security Act of 1947. They embraced Operation Mockingbird, that family did, to collect intelligence on reporters, excuse me, and to manipulate the news about them. They were really manipulating their public image. POTUS wanted to force feed, not force feed, to force federal, I'm putting little abbreviations, and I'm not reading them very well. He wanted to force federal employees to get permission to talk, and it's kind of pre-censorship. like the USSR. So what this means is they were not allowed to say anything at all unless they first got clearance that it was okay to say what they wanted to say, or to give an interview that they were asked to give. They had to get permission for everything. They wanted it set up, the family wanted it set up to be sure to look like the older brother was not involved in anything untoward. Dean Rusk, one of his helpers, bullied CBS for him. And they wanted to restrict any kind of information and restrict facts that were found, suppress facts. They would intimidate and spy on citizens to protect their public image from scandal. They were very aggressive about it. It curated their image all the time. Levathis at Fox brought Marilyn a revised script. She was an astute businesswoman, he said. She was very rational. They could not have had a better meeting. And he ordered a new rewrite using her ideas. She suggested some physical comedy. She was in fine spirits. She was looking forward to returning to work. And he felt that the discord between Marilyn and Fox was because of her so-called advisors and not her, namely Dr. Greenson, Engelberg, Murray, and Newcomb. But she was not unhappy and she was not depressed, and this is in her last days. She told him that it was unfortunate for her to be a legend because she always felt she could not disappoint people. It was difficult. The last time that he saw her, now this would be Levathis from Fox. This was the last time he saw her. His impression of her was as follows. This is a quote. "This was not, I thought, a shallow person, and I was sorry I never really knew her. She was a woman who made distinctions, who thought about her life, who knew the difference between sham and reality. She had depth. Of course, she was enormously complex, and I had a sense of some real underlying suffering there, but at her best, there was no one like her. The wounds with Fox were healed, and when I last saw her a week before her death, she was like a young and beautiful starlet, eager to do a picture that now had real possibilities. Of course, it was a huge relief to Marilyn that her career was back on track again. She had every reason to be optimistic about her future." But soon Levathis was fired, and Zanuck did approve Marilyn's rehiring. Fox was in deep money trouble because of the debt incurred by the movie Cleopatra. Meanwhile, back in London/Egypt, and they had to have shut down all their other pictures they were making. They had to close the commissary at the studio, and they had to stop watering the lawn in order to afford to produce Cleopatra. But they went ahead and rehired Marilyn, and they did take out a $13 million insurance, which would be $90 million today, which was weird because they had, supposedly blackballed her for being mentally ill and a drug abuser, but they took out this insurance on her, and the company would not have given them insurance if what they claimed earlier had been true about her. It wasn't true. The Fox studio collected on the insurance when she died. They took this policy out 3 days before she died. She was worth more dead than alive, the book says. She was worried about associations with the mob. She had good reason to be. She mentioned how violent these gangsters were in Hollywood in a British interview. She despised them, and she had a soft heart and didn't associate with those with brutal tendencies. For example, she didn't like people who hunted. Let's see here. Her friend poet Norman Roston said that Marilyn was drawn to all living things. She would spend hundreds of dollars to try and save a storm-damaged tree and would mourn its death. She welcomed birds, providing tree houses and food for many species that visited her lawn. She worried about them in bad weather. She worried about cats and dogs. She once had a dog that was by nature contemplative, but she was convinced it was depressed. She did her best to make him play, and that depressed him even more. On the rare occasions that he did an antic pirouette, she would hug and kiss him, delirious with joy. But, you know, gangsters had tentacles all over the movie industry, and she did not date them. When she knew that that's who they were, she would not date them. She was on, at this time, tons of international magazine covers. The White House suddenly put Jackie on some movie magazines. Very odd. And the question was she jealous of Marilyn? Was this orchestrated by her in the background? This is just a question being asked. Paula Strasberg later said she and Marilyn Monroe spent the weekend of July 28th and 29th going over the script at Marilyn's home. She was not at Cal Neva Lodge, as some erroneously claim. Marilyn had gotten Paula to come for this from halfway around the world, because she was in Europe at the time. I think she was in Rome at the time. It just makes sense based on this and a lot of other stuff, including eyewitness testimony, that she was in Cal Neva the weekend before. On Monday the 30th, Paula Strasberg flew to New York on a ticket that Marilyn brought her. Marilyn was torn. Fox wanted Paula out of the picture, but Marilyn felt insecure without her and wanted her feedback. Paula was upset at what she considered Marilyn's ingratitude for listening to Fox about getting rid of her, and the friendship was broken. It was done. Marilyn even transferred the T-Bird that she'd given to Johnny, and the title and the insurance to Paula. She just wanted to wash her hands of the whole thing. And this is big. She wanted to change her will. Because if you remember, all these people, these hangers-on, were collecting if she died. July 30th, she made an 8-minute call to the AG. She knew that the FBI was spying on her. She didn't know the mob was, and the family from Boston also, you know, the brothers also. Chapter 40, Marilyn was not a recluse. You know, there's that rumor. She was depressed and a recluse before she died. One author at least claims that she did herself in after time alone at home. This is not true. She was not a recluse. That wasn't an issue, and it's well documented, and how she spent her time was very well documented. Monday morning, Eunice found her in the garden making plans for planting a garden of color. Not a victim, recovering from a weekend of, you know, drugs and alcohol, etc., etc. So she got up early to drive Paula to the airport to fly back to New York. She had Eunice take her to the nursery and spent hours picking out fruit trees and plants, because she was planning to not only plant a color garden, but an orchard. She ordered food and wine, not to share. She was getting ready to fire Mrs. Murray, as she called her. And she had company coming, Whitey Snyder and the makeup guy, and his fiance. She really liked Dom Perignon. Now, liking doesn't mean that she drank it 24/7. That was her preferred brand of champagne. And she only ever had it for breakfast one time. But people like to say that. She said, I had it for breakfast once because I was in love. The resumption of the filming, you know, he's hired back on the job. Dean is hired back on the job, and then immediately filming is delayed because Dean was already committed to something, you know, after having quit, and the movie stopped. He got involved in something else, and now he's not available to go back, and they wanted him, so they had to wait a while. So on July 31st, Marilyn decided she'd go to New York on August 11th and be at her apartment. She was making social plans. She called her housekeeper in New York and spent hours with her publicist then viewing the work of possible directors, like looking at movies for the next movie she was going to make with Gene Kelly. It was arranged that Thompson would fly from Mexico to LA to meet with her at her home on the 5th of August. And she continued to arrange her house. She was still waiting for furniture. Anne Green, the photographer Milton Green's wife, Milton Green, you know, her previous really close friend, had a dream in late July of 62. She was known to have precognitive dreams. She woke her husband up, Milton, and said, Marilyn needs you, and she doesn't have anyone she can trust. She really needs you. And she talked him into getting in touch. They had not spoken in 5 years. Marilyn was shocked to hear from him. She says, it's impossible that Anne felt my need for you. And they talked for 3 hours. Oh, I went through a lot of work here. Huh. I think here we go. And it is Amy Green, wasn't Anne? I don't know why I wrote that down wrong. So Milton Green's wife was Amy, and she's the one who had the precognitive dream. They spoke for 3 hours. Monroe said to Milton, you know, I'm right back where I was before the Marilyn Monroe productions, which they started together. They're giving me the worst roles. It's like the last 10 years never happened. I'm right back to where I don't want to be. Don't do it, he said. If you want me to come out there, I'll leave today. But predictably, she didn't want to be a bother. She told her old friend she'd be fine, that he could go to Paris for his fashion show he was going to, but they'd all get together when Amy and Milton returned from abroad, but such was not to be. Later, when she died, Milton never believed that she did it herself. None of her true friends did. Milton was convinced there were others involved, but he didn't know who. He said to his wife, you were right. I should have gone to her. Amy Green wasn't the only one who experienced an ominous premonition that something bad was going to happen to Marilyn. A very strange incident occurred, which also foreshadowed her tragic fate. And this is really odd. Billy Graham had a vision, and he told people, he said, Marilyn Monroe is in mortal danger. He woke up with the strange feeling that she was in big trouble. He tried to call her and warn her. He called the producer Dick Roth in the middle of the night, but Roth was mad and said Marilyn's not taking calls. Then called Debbie Reynolds, who was, able to get a hold of Marilyn. She contacted her hair guy, Sidney Gilaroff, and he was good friends with Marilyn, but he couldn't get through to Marilyn. They tried the next day with no luck. On August the 4th, Marilyn called him and talked to him. In the meantime, Debbie Reynolds later said, I believe she was done in. Marilyn did speak to her stand-in, and the stand-in, I believe her name was Emily. She said Marilyn was really up. She was happy. She was painfully honest. She was a straight arrow. Respected reporter Army Archer said this in Variety in August 6th of 62. She had an interesting time for it to come out. She was just an honest, straightforward person. Marilyn was unnerved by running into Joe DiMaggio the past weekend. And it almost was like, was he stalking her again, was kind of the implication. She had no desire and no plans to remarry him. She didn't end up dead because of being despondent about Joe DiMaggio. He had been hired by Otash, the crooked private investigator, to keep tabs on her. So her instincts were right. And was that why he was at the restaurant that she went to? That this next night she went to a restaurant, and lo and behold, she runs into him again. He'd been recently fired. He had been, and his public appearances all canceled. He refused to do some event for his boss, and he just got, adamant and rude about it, and his boss fired him. there was a tournament and programs had been made and mailed out and everything, and it was really, really embarrassing that, you know, the guest of honor is not going to show up. And another famous baseball player stepped in at the last minute, sort of saved the situation, but they were really mad at Joe DiMaggio. The sponsors were really mad. So after her death, his former boss tried to weave some romantic tale about them, that, oh, he quit to go to Los Angeles to convince Marilyn to remarry. That's all nonsense. He got fired for being insubordinate, basically, and unreliable. She talked on the phone with her hairdresser friend, Kenneth Battelle. He said, I loved Marilyn. She was very human. Not everybody is, like in the movie industry. I had started doing Marilyn after Some Like It Hot, and really of all of my steady clients, Marilyn was the one who was truly my friend. And it's interesting how many people say that about her. She made an appointment for a dress fitting for a gown that was being designed for her by a Broadway production by Irving Berlin called Mr. President. It was going to be at Washington, D.C.'s National Theater in September of '62, and she was going to go to it. She and he, Irving Berlin, had a mutual admiration thing going on. This was a benefit for a Kennedy charity. Rose, Jackie, Bobby, all were honorary chair people. And she was talking to the designer during this fitting and saying that she had high hopes for this movie continuing with Dean Martin. It was going to be great. She asked millionaire designer, if you remember him from her life, Henry Rosenfeld, to be her escort. He had wanted to marry her, if you remember, and she had said no. It's interesting that she planned on attending the show in D.C. and not in New York City, where if she went to D.C. to this show, excuse me, it was a Broadway show, but it was premiering in D.C. for a Kennedy Foundation. And you know who she was hoping to run into and kind of show up. As it happened, the older brother put in only a brief appearance and later apologized to Berlin. Of course, this is after the fact. Marilyn was dead, and there was rumor that he was in grief. Which is interesting because, you know, he was purported to not really care about her and used her. Marilyn was busy in her last week shopping for art and furniture, shopping for garden plants and trees, consulting with Dr. Greenson, and getting an injection from Engelberg. She talked with Gene Kelly about their possible movie together. She invited him to the Sunday barbecue she was planning, at which Roberts was doing the cooking. She wanted to have the director Thompson meet Kelly. On Wednesday, she called Saks and ordered a $382.62 Gucci dress. Dorothy Kilgallen wrote 3 times about Marilyn in her last week. She made a barb about Greg Greenspan. It sounded like she knew something bad was about to happen and was trying to encourage and defend Marilyn. The tone of her columns were weird. Who was talking to Kilgallen and giving her information about the situation that Greenson was so controlling? The story seemed concocted and kind of implausible. On August the 2nd, she called Marilyn, and Marilyn poured out her heart about she talked about holding a press conference about the brothers, and had split from them, but they were ignoring her. This is the story. Now, this is not true. This is the story that Marilyn called and confided and was upset and wanted to get back at them for treating her poorly. And all of this was kind of a concocted thing. And this author, Keith Badman, came up with this for some reason. He claimed, that Dorothy Kilgallen talked to Marilyn. He claimed that Marilyn was making these confessions to this columnist and being really indiscreet. It's just not what happened. And then part of the story was that the older brother had supposedly revealed to Marilyn Monroe that he had inspected ETs, dead aliens, their bodies that were from outer space. Now, that's a whole other story. But this is what this guy said. And the big question that nobody seems to know is, did the older brother ever talk to her about UFOs and aliens? Was this a topic that they shared a conversation about? I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility, since we now know today that this is something the government has obsessed about for a long time. And it was greatly ridiculed in these days, of Marilyn Monroe. So, interesting little tidbit that just seems incongruous. But it's implausible that Marilyn, with so much interview experience, would tell Dorothy Kilgallen any of this stuff, even if it was true. And it's highly unlikely that it's true, but even if it was, not likely she'd talk about it. She really went out of her way to avoid Dorothy Kilgallen. She said, she's written some bitchy stuff about me. She avoided the bar that she knew that Kilgallen patronized, and there's really no evidence for this story. It's like the author, what's his name? Badman made this all up himself. She would never jeopardize national security. She might talk about stuff, but never if it was truly serious. She talked openly about her fear of nuclear war and her patriotism. She just wouldn't have done it. The CIA has phone taps and documentation of that show that Howard Rothberg, not Marilyn, told his close friend Dorothy Kilgallen about this stuff. So not only is it not true, not only did Marilyn not say these things, but it didn't come from Badman to begin with. It came from a guy called Howard Rothberg, and somehow the whole thing, like a really bad espionage game of telephone through the CIA's documentation of their spying, got attributed in a very circumstantial way, very roundabout way, to Marilyn. There was a government CIA program called Operation Moondust that wanted to collect foreign advanced technology like, Soviet satellites. That might have been what they might have been talking about. Fake CIA documents did circulate, and unscrupulous detectives and journalists tried to use them for publicity, advantage, book money, etc. But this was all baloney. The legitimacy of these CIA documents, now there are the real ones that really do exist. She really was being taped, and there really are transcripts of those conversations. But then there's the fake stuff. And the fake ones were disavowed, and the rumors that were based on them are 100% false. It's a hoax to sell books. And it doesn't merit serious consideration, according to the author. Kilgallen and Rothberg were friends, and he gave her the keys to his townhouse in Manhattan to secretly meet with Ron Pataki. That name should be familiar for you if you've heard the videos I made about the Dorothy Kilgallen book. Ron Pataki was we'll call him a gigolo, allegedly, who romanced her right before she died. And she would meet secretly at Rothberg's apartment. He was the prime suspect in her death. And her death was very similar to Marilyn's in many ways. The lies in this hoax they still circulate. It's just weird. They're still popular. They helped to tarnish Marilyn Monroe's reputation. You know, all these rumors of schemes to enhance her reputation or to destroy her reputation. There was just constant gossip, good and bad, about her. That was just delusional, most of it. Thursday, August the 2nd, she talked. We're back to her schedule. She talked with Marlon Brando. He felt she was more emotionally stable. After the fact, he talked about this call. More emotionally stable and taking charge of her life. She told him that she knew she was being used by the Strasbergs and by others. She invited him to dinner, but he had other plans. He said she was not depressed. He had no clue of any kind of impending self-destruction. There was just no clue. Years later, Ileana Douglas. Now, Ileana Douglas is one of my favorite actresses. And she is the grandfather of Melvyn Douglas, famous 1930s, 1940s actor. He played Cary Grant's best friend in Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, one of the funniest movies ever made. One of my favorite movies. Anyway, I digress. Ileana Douglas, who, you know, from a great acting family, went on from her grandfather to become an actress. She spoke about Marilyn Monroe with Brando. And Brando told her they most certainly murdered her. Those are Brando's words. Douglas said, the way he said it gave me chills. Marilyn had a heated call with the Strasbergs on August the 2nd, the same day as the conversation she had with Brando. She told Paula Strasberg she was not needed on the set. She told her Fox doesn't want you there. And she asked her, Paula, to give her keys to Marilyn's New York apartment, for Paula to give those keys to Marilyn's maid in New York. And supposedly it ended cordially. Paula later said that Marilyn gave her, this is a lie, gave her the New York City apartment key to get it ready for Marilyn's upcoming visit in August, and that's not true at all. So some of these lies, you know, it's easy to prove that there were lies, and it's weird that people would even waste their energy. Strasberg said, my husband and I were expecting her to arrive next week, and she sent us the key to their apartment to get it ready. I talked to her Thursday night, and she sounded fine. She was looking forward to working with both of us and was quite thrilled about the new play that we were going to do. My husband, Lee Strasberg, and I were going to talk to her about doing a Broadway play. On the screen, you really lost something of Marilyn's sensitivity. We've watched her on stage when she rehearsed with us in the actor's studio. She had a quality second to no actress in the world. Paula added there was no question that Marilyn expected to complete Something's Got to Give. And it's interesting. She wants to paint this picture of, like, we really know the real Marilyn, and we know what her real talent is, and she should be working with us and not in movies. And she totally lied, because there's witnesses that Marilyn fired her and told her, give back the key to the maid, and told the maid, I'm coming, and you can get the apartment ready. So it's all just nonsense. She had a visit, Marilyn had a visit later on August the 2nd, same day, from Whitey. And Whitey said, you know, she was as happy as we've ever seen her. And the two of them made plans to revisit in the next week. She was not acting lovelorn. She was not pining for the brothers. She was not depressed. She was happy about her work. But the book Goddess claims otherwise. It enraged her friend, Ralph Roberts. He said she was not twisting and turning in her bitterness about the brothers, what the book implied. A quote that Marilyn gave to George Barris 2 weeks before her death makes clear her true attitude. She said, I have no regrets, because if I made any mistakes, I was responsible. There is now and there is the future. What's happened is behind. So it follows you around. So what? I have my down moments, but I'm also robust. I think more robust than down. As long as you're alive, you can be vital, but you don't give up until you stop breathing. kind of creepy, you know. But it was very upbeat. She was very optimistic. Her career was on the upswing. Billy Wilder wanted her for his next movie. Her publicist had bought the rights to I Love Louise that she was going to make with Gene Kelly. On a table in her home was a telegram, after she died, a telegram from Anita Loos, the creator of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and the telegram said, "Dear Miss Monroe, on behalf of Anita Loos, now in Europe, we would like to know if you'd be interested in the star role new musical based on a French play, Go-Go. The book by Anita Loos, lyrics by Gladys Shelley, and enchanting music by Claude Leville. Can send you the script and the music if you express interest. Signed, Natalia Donesi Murray." Murray, not related. When this was publicly revealed shortly after Monroe's death, the Los Angeles Times quoted an unnamed associate of Marilyn's as asking, "Does that sound like she was depressed about her career?" She did a photo shoot. She had a photo shoot scheduled for September 12th of 62 in New York for the Esquire magazine. She was planning a Mexican trip September 15th for Independence Day celebrations, not as some people alleged to adopt a child. That was not on her radar. On Thursday, August 2nd of 62, she was home alone. Ralph Roberts came by to give her a massage, and she went to bed after the massage. That was it. But in a 1991 article in Vanity Fair, it was claimed that she went to a party at Peter Lawford's and was weird and drunk, and this is just not true. Ralph had house guests who agreed. He left the house guests to go to Marilyn's house to give her a massage. They discussed mutual friends that they admired and that they had an affection for. She was not depressed. She was not morose. She was not drugged. She wasn't drinking. And she was not thinking about death. She was thinking fondly about her friend she admired. He said it's shameful that people later created a narrative for dramatic effect. She'd wanted to change her will, and this was not the first time she wanted to change it. She was eliminating heirs, the Strasburgs, Greenson, and Newcomb. This was scheduled. She had an appointment to do this for Monday, August the 6th. Her lawyer later was the one who called her deeply ill. Somebody's lying. This lawyer, Greenson's brother-in-law, Rudden. I think I'm going to stop here. This is the end of this chapter, and I hate stopping mid-chapter because it really breaks up the narrative. So this is going to be the end of the real video number 14, and we'll start right up with video number 15 next. Thank you for watching Slung to Foil.